Hello, so here we are at Inside the Machine podcast of Neural DSP, and today we have a very special guest, Adam Nolly GetGood. How are you, Adam?
I'm great. How are you doing, mate?
Yeah, all good. Yeah, so how is life, man? What have you been up to?
Yeah, life has been good. As ever, it seems like these days I'm doing more and more varied things. So I've got a lot of kind of production work going on where I'm mixing and mastering for bands. And then I've also been doing quite a lot of stuff with the company GGD, which is GetGood Drums, my drum company that I own with a couple of other people, as well as just trying to enjoy a bit of life too, having an amazing summer here in the UK. So trying to see a bit of the sun if that's possible.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I've been using a lot of your GetGood Drums software. Like I use it all the time. It's my always way to go. Like everything else is in the trash and uninstalled, and
So, that's amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, there's loads of great drum libraries out there, but we are really proud of what we do.
Yeah, and I really like that everything is the piano roll is very well distributed, and it's so easy just to get your idea done. That's I really like it.
Man, that's a huge bit of praise there. I'm sure you know as well from your work with Neural that sometimes like getting things to be intuitive can be the least intuitive process.
Yeah, exactly.
You really have to challenge. There's so many questions which come up almost daily, which are like, how should we implement something? And I literally have no idea. I have to really break down what the core process that I use and other people use when they're working with a software and try and figure out what could possibly be intuitive, because sometimes it's just so seemingly obvious yet difficult to replicate.
Yeah, exactly. You have to go through that process of creating that UI and like many times and over again, and things that you think that are simple and intuitive for you are not for other people, and then you have to also make it versatile. It's very difficult, but I think that you nailed it very well. Like for me, it's a very good library to get my ideas done, and I don't have to tweak almost anything to get the creativity running. And for me, that's very important, since when you're working on inside of the box, then you have to take care of so many other different stuff that if you still have to get your drum sound and work for 2 hours just to be able to, happy working, it's very exhausting. But with this one, it's just like you just put it there. The notes are right there in like 3 octaves, and that's all. There you go.
Yeah,
I really like it.
It's funny, man, because what you just described about sitting down to demo something and just getting totally waylaid by the mix and trying to get things sound good is pretty much how I ended up doing music production in the first place. All I wanted was to be able to demo my songs, but every time I sat down and did that, it was such a I'd record a riff and I'd listen back to it and be like, this sounds terrible. Like what I hear in my head is something so powerful. So I would just stop writing, and then I'd spend the next 2 days like trying to figure out how to make that riff sound good. And I think, I mean, it's interesting. I think I definitely lost something in that process of creativity and spontaneity. But at the same time, that process of figuring out how to make individual riffs sound good is kind of what then led me into a career in audio.
Yeah. Oh.
So it's pretty funny how these things go,
That's true. Yeah. Interesting. It happens also to me that you get blocked by this pursuing this sound in your demo stages, and it's very nice when you can have something that sounds pretty good or quite there already, and then you can continue with this creativity, because then when all the technology and all the settings and how you have to tweak the sounds and how if you mix on the fly, everything gets a little bit of energy here and there, and time and concentration. So then if you are in the creative process, it's something that gets you exhausted by the end of the day. And then, as you said, you end up looping something and trying to get it sound right. And sometimes it's what you want. But if you just want to write a track really fast in a couple of days, you want everything to be running smoothly as possible.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a firm believer that there's such different headspaces, like creativity, and then it's funny, I was just talking about this the other day, like for me, like creativity and the initial parts of projects for me are all about like adding things. So it's an additive process to make something amazing, and then the later stages, like fine tuning the sound of something, for me is like that's when you have to go into a very critical mindset And it's really negative. It's like you're searching for the problems and how to fix them. And those two things to me do not mix. Like, you can't be thinking about how to write a song and express yourself at the same time as being really critical. If you're really trying to express something, there's plenty of people that make music in that way. But for me, like, it's so difficult to. That's why it's so jarring when you're writing a riff and you're writing a song and you're composing and things don't sound right. It's constantly taking you away from this kind of additive mindset of like adding things and making it better, because you're constantly getting kind of distracted by the negative things that you want to fix.
Yeah, no, you're right. We jumped something very important. We could do it now. So for those who don't know you, because not everybody watching the podcast might know who you are. So can you do a brief introduction before we continue with this awesome conversation?
Yeah, sure. So I'm sure loads of people don't know who I am, but I am Adam. I'm from England. A lot of people call me Nolly, and I started my career in music in this room here. I'm in my mix room, which is at my parents' house here in Bath. So I was writing my own music. I was playing in a band called Red Sea's Fire, and I got the opportunity to work with a band called Periphery, who are from the States. I'd made good friends with Misha Mansour, who's the principal songwriter, or in those days was, and guitarist of the band. He gave me the opportunity to work on their second full-length album, which was an opportunity I definitely didn't deserve because I was extremely green. But basically, through that opportunity, I got really heavily into record production as well as playing bass for Periphery. So I toured with Periphery for 3 or 4 years officially, and then more recently, I've quit the touring lifestyle to come and just focus on music production. So it's kind of my history. I've had the great pleasure of working with some amazing bands recently, bands that I probably don't deserve to work with. But, just really enjoying that and focusing on both the studio side of things, working with clients, and also mixing.
That's great. So what for example, took what was the thing that made you like quit the tour lifestyle, or the main point? Maybe there's many, but like one of the main, if you can resume it a little bit for people that some people might wonder, like, why would you quit that kind of lifestyle?
Yeah, for sure. I think actually probably one of the hardest things about it was coming to terms with the fact that it was what I really wanted, given that it seems like such a desirable thing,
Yeah, exactly.
Touring the world in a cool band. And yeah, so I mean, I guess there was always aspects of it that didn't really work for me with who I am, my personality. It's really hard to say anything and bad about it. It's just really for me that being away from home constantly, it's a very repetitive thing. And I guess I always had this inner desire actually to focus on record production. Like for me, I really wanted to be able to be in the studio with bands, or in my studio here mixing and perfecting my craft here. And I went on for as long as I could. I developed actually a lot of my mixing techniques just mixing on my laptop that I'm Skyping you on now. I mixed many records on this laptop too, on the tour bus, or at people's houses in between tours when I wasn't able to return home, and that was really amazing to have that experience. But I guess a whole load of life factors came into play, and with all of them summing together, it was just like, yeah, this is a good time to call it quits. And I think something was nice was that I kind of quit while I was ahead with that. I didn't do it at a moment that was extremely pressured for the band. I didn't do it at a point where I was really falling apart or something like that. It was just like, there's an opportunity to go and focus on this other thing that I really care about. So I chose to go and
That's
do
great.
that.
Yeah, you have to follow your passion. Some people like have different opportunities, and you have to take what you want and just do what you're more passionate about. In this case, in your case, it's the studio, and that's really amazing because I love it too. So that's great.
I think you also have to be honest with yourself about what your passions are, because it can be quite difficult sometimes. Yeah. I think.
And you see many famous people that are talented in two things. For example, the vocalist of 30 Seconds to Mars, Jared Leto, he does very good acting, and I'm sure that sometimes those passions collide, and you gotta choose sometimes. It applies to many people, but it's amazing what you said, that you have been mixing on the bus with the laptop. That's something that nowadays technology allows you to do that. Like how long have you been mixing along your life? How many years have you been mixing or producing music?
I guess. Yeah, I guess going back to my first dabbles with it, we'd be talking, I guess, 8 or 9 years now. Like where I started demoing, metal music and trying to make it sound good for real. And then professionally, I guess it's been about 5 years since I started making. So your laptop has been a very, very good friend. Oh yeah, no, I have to. It was a slight white lie. This laptop has been with me for about 2 years. No, wait, sorry, I forgot. My trusty laptop actually got stolen last summer, almost a year ago. So this is a replacement for that one. Gosh, I'm getting really confused. But when you just use like your backup on every new computer, so it basically feels like it's exactly the same computer. Yeah. It's kind of annoying. Sometimes you really want the new experience and you boot it up and it's almost disappointing.
I did it not long ago. I did that. I just backed up everything in OneDrive and I was like, okay, this is getting a little bit out of hands. So I tagged it with the year and I was like, okay, if I just need a file from there, I just can access through like the time machine and just drop the folder. But I really wanted a fresh start already. It was getting a little bit messy.
Oh man, you saying that's giving me the desire to do that.
Do it.
It's really difficult though. Really difficult when you've got loads of ongoing projects.
Yeah, no, you're right. But I've also noticed that once I did that process, that I took my computer backed up to the new computer, and it didn't perform well. And I was, what's going on? And then I formatted from scratch, and the performance was already back up. So I don't know. Maybe there's some weird connections of translations between operating systems that maybe don't apply that well, and you don't notice because you're used to the same speed. But if it's a new computer, maybe sometimes it might be good to do a fresh start. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I went and did all sorts of like scary deleting of system files at some point, like because like I went through this point where my computer wouldn't even restart, like it would just hang instead of shut down. And I managed to get that to go away. I don't know what out of the thousands of system files I deleted it was, but I managed to steer. I mean, it felt like I was walking on a knife edge, but anyway, I mean, it's all working. So yeah, this laptop is it's just the trapped soul of my previous laptop in a new shell. So yeah, I guess this is the third in line of the laptops that I've used. But it is amazing what you can do with technology. Yeah, and that's true.
Even now there's great apps like I'm using this app called SonarWorks, which is it equalizes your headphones or your speaker system so that they sound a lot flatter, basically.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because I've tried it once in a control room and it worked quite nicely, but I've never tried it on headphones.
Right.
And what did you do? You did it on both?
Yep. So my rig behind me, it's all kind of SonarWorks.
Okay.
And that makes a huge difference, especially because only about a year ago I added a sub, and as you know, a sub in a room can throw the bass frequencies really out of whack. But when it's right, you can hear so much better. And so I got the sub and I did the SonarWorks right around the same time, and it's a gigantic difference. Like it flattens the sub. I was getting like this big trough and then a huge like 40 hertz thing, which at first was like, wow, this is incredible. I have a sub now. And after the SonarWorks, it's flat down there. And now it just sounds like a continuation of the sound, which is what you want, really.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic about like treating your rooms. Like not so many people are used to do that. And I think that SonarWorks, at least for me, it's the only software that I've seen that makes it easy. Like it's just like an easy user access type of thing that you don't have to study your room with a complex type of impulse responses and like correct it from there. It does it a little bit automatically. It tells you what to do, and it's pretty amazing what it can do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as you can see behind me, I have a whole load of treatment up in my room anyway. And I think, if you're looking if you want to have a good mix space, you're pretty much always going to want to put bass traps in the corners and put absorbers at the primary reflection points and a cloud above your mix position. I mean, that's such a safe set of things to do that's not going to ruin the sound of your room and almost invariably improve it. And then with that, something like SonarWorks can really flatten it out. But yeah, you were asking about the headphones. So it comes with like these presets for headphones, but I guess every headphone is pretty different. And I actually did this thing recently where I sent my headphones, these ones, to them, and they put it onto a test rig and they scan your headphones, and then they send you back your headphones along with a custom preset that you can load into Sonarworks. And it's different. The preset for these specific headphones is very different than the generic one that it came with. And it sounds awesome. I've only had them back for a couple of weeks, and I've been doing quite a lot of mixing. Even though I have this room here, I've been doing quite a lot of mixing down at my apartment on headphones, and really loving the difference. It clears things up so much.
That's great. And so nowadays, are you doing everything at home, or you are recording some bigger instruments or drums or something else at some other studio in the UK, or you're just mixing, just mastering, or what are you really focused on?
Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, I'm wrapping up some mixing for projects that, well, I've just finished pretty much the last set of projects that I actually engineered myself, which kind of go back into 2017 as well. Because these days I have actually been focusing a bit more on mixing. That said, I still go and get involved with the projects. Like, for example, I'm mixing an album for a band called Harken, or Haken, I'm not quite sure. They're an amazing prog band from London. And yeah, I kind of got to do my ideal thing, which is I went along for the setup days of the drums. They recorded at a studio in London, took down my microphone collection, tuned up the drums. They used a drum dial to kind of to save the settings that I'd got everything tuned up to. And then they track the drums on their own, and then I get sent the files at the end to mix. And that was a cool sounding studio called the Crypt in London. But for the most part, I use a studio in Devon in England called Middle Farm. I use that for drum recording pretty much exclusively, because it's just a good combination of everything you'd want, from like an amazing sounding live room. It's kind of a converted barn, and it just sounded so good that there's not really much modification done to the space. It's just got this amazing mid-range that brings out especially snare drums or just the shells of a drum kit over the cymbals so nicely. It makes it so usable. And then it's just a comfortable atmosphere. It's really well priced. So that would be where I track drums. And my preference is always to track drums in the best environment that you can.
What is your experience with rooms recording drums?
I've had quite a lot of experiences, actually. I've been really lucky to work in some amazing studios. And I mean, I do have to say, I feel like sometimes the price of a studio or how luxurious it is doesn't translate to the sound quality. And that there's also really great drum rooms that are not appropriate for the kind of music that I normally work on, which tends to be kind of metal and rock. Because sometimes you go into these studios, there's a lot of these kind of big luxury studios that are converted churches and things like that, very high ceiling chapels. And, they sound so impressive. You go in there and you put a snare drum down and you hit it, and it just sounds like this massive, expansive sound. And you think this is going to be the best drum sound in the world. And during tracking, it totally is. And then you get back to mixing it, and the drum sound just doesn't have the early reflections. It's all this kind of just huge whoosh. And I find it's very difficult to level those in the mix. You can't find the point where it's giving the excitement to the drums without it just being this huge wash that's killing all the other instruments and the close mic sounds. So, for me, the best studios are not always the most expensive, and they tend to be the medium or even smaller rooms that have a real snappy kind of shotgunny sound, especially on the snare drum, and that you can get to be present in the mix and give the drums some life, and it doesn't wash all over the other instruments.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because sometimes people tend to think that the most expensive the studio is, or the bigger the room it is, the better drum sound that you will have. But it's not. It's not always like that. Like, it doesn't apply to everything. So
no, and there's so many psychological things. If you're paying £1,000 a day to be in a really nice studio, people tend to be a lot more tense about what they're doing, unless money's not an object. And then on the other side, though, if you are in a really nice high-end studio, you've probably got like a runner assistant that can make sure your life's really comfortable. You've got amazing equipment all around you. There is that feeling sometimes of all the options are open to me, which can be really nice too. So it kind of depends on the session. And I just wouldn't recommend people putting like 90% of their budget into going to a really nice studio, because you're probably just going to stress yourselves out and not get the best performances that you might be able to get in a cheaper studio that could sound equally good or every bit as good.
How are you facing, for example, when you go to a big studio and you have we talked with Forrester and with Ermin about this. Like, how do you face, for example, when you get to a big studio and you have all these like fancy compressors and fancy preamps and this analog mixing console and like all the analog gear in the world? Like, how do you face to? Because what we talked about, that it's when it's not your studio, it's very risky to get your hands into those equipment on the recording process, because you don't know what's going to happen. It might be broken, some knob might be dirty, and some channel strip of the console. It's very, very tricky, at least in my experience. But how do you face that, since you apparently work a lot in the box? So what do you use, or how do you face it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I kind of go through waves of it, actually. I think coming out of doing so much recording without that fancy gear or mixing just completely on my laptop, going into the big studios, at first, I think I was a little bit shy of getting my hands dirty with all sorts of, outboard stuff, and then started to get more into it, and then started to go a bit too far where, sometimes a bit too much processing on the way in, especially on drums, especially on things like snare. If you just do too much on the way in, you can end up with the bleed being out of control, and it just ruins your snare sound. Or like you spoke about, I mixed a record for a band last year. They recorded everything in an amazing drum room. They're really professionally recorded. And of course, the studio had these vintage Neve preamps. And of course, they put their snare top and kick in through them. And the one that the snare top was going through was just giving intermittent signal. So they got to pretty close to the end of the record and realized that when they were comping together the drums, that like half the takes didn't have any snare top channel. And in the end, they had to send me just completely reconstructed MIDI snare. So it's like, I would have definitely preferred a Behringer mixer recording that had all of the right channels there than having to do that. But it's tough. It's tough. I think at the moment I'm starting to go back down again into not doing so much on the way in. And it's funny, I think the same thing for me also goes with how much additive or subtractive EQ I tend to be doing in my mix. I think I'm going through a phase of going to more subtractive EQ, which I think is my preference. But, you start looking at all these kind of A-list Hollywood mixers and you see them cranking boosts on everything and you start to get really into that idea. I think that must be the way to do it. But I think subtractive is way less sexy. To hear your kick drum and cut low end instead of boosting high end is way less sexy. But I think I'm liking how that works. And that's a bit more in line with I think probably the better sounding records that I've worked on. I've had that approach.
Yeah, no, I agree actually. Like for me, it was also the same transition, like of first boosting, of course, when you're learning to just like more, but then you start seeing that when your ear can recognize the spectrum, it's much easier for your ear to focus when you are taking out frequencies. At least for me, it's much easier to recognize like what I don't want than what I want, because then the volume changes and the whole thing, the picture for me changes. So yeah, I also do it like that. But I was also thinking about the analog approach. The overall approach of mixing has changed during the decades. I mean, if you listen how, for example, I don't know, pop or disco music used to sound in the 80s. It's not that the gear was not there. Like you can mix the same song with the same SSL console and the same gear that exists from the 60s or the 70s, but the approach was so different. Now, if I listen to one of those tracks of the 80s, like they're lacking so much bass, and like it's so strange how a good mix was approached. What do you think about that? Why was that? Or do you think it was about the monitors, or just people had this set of mind that was the good sound, or what do you think it is?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I mean, I think I'm just guessing here, but I think it might be a bit more to do with the recording medium, and then more importantly, the playback systems that people listened on. I think the average person didn't have access to wide range systems. Like they didn't have systems that reproduce much low end. If you listened on your Walkman with the earbuds that didn't have much bass, or you listened in your car, or you listened on your home hi-fi system that was really a carryover from classical hi-fi systems and didn't reproduce much low end. I think low end perhaps was at best not necessary, and at worst perhaps kind of dangerous, or just could mean that your system's working far too hard to reproduce those frequencies and potentially not sounding good in the rest of the range. That would be my guess. But
it's a good
I
guess.
also think it's
a good guess.
Yeah. I think there must be some element of truth in there, but I'd also be interested to know if it is just, if all the records you hear sound that way, it takes quite a big leap of faith to chuck tons more low end onto a mix than anything you've ever heard before. And I mean, that happens with me sometimes to these days. Like, I like to hear a lot of low end on my mixes. I like my mixes to kind of extend the really full range, and sometimes I'm fairly sure that I'm getting more low end than anything that I'm referencing and that it still sounds balanced. Yet I'll probably choose to bring it back down a hair. I'll kind of split the difference because I don't want to be so far away from the general sound,
Yeah.
And essentially when I'm working with a client's music, they want to some extent for me to homogenize it with what else is out there, for it to be something you could put next to another record that's current, and for it to not sound like it's a whole million miles away from that.
That's true. And let's talk a little bit more about your creative process when you for example, are you writing when you're writing music on your own, or when you're producing a band? How do you face, for example, when you're producing a band? Let's start from there. How do you face the production process? How do you listen to the tracks, and how do you how are you critic about the song structure or the sound that they want to achieve, or how do you face this kind of projects when you're given a couple of songs and then you have to face it to the studio process and start recording or changing the songs? And what is your first steps, or what do you like the most?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think something which I guess I'm comfortable with is a lot of the bands and projects that I work on, even with in the studio as opposed to just mixing, are bands that are very experienced and know what they want and know how they like to write and don't really need or want much input on that. And I like that because I really love the engineering side of things. I really like getting the tones and getting the sounds to put their music across in the best way. And I think a lot of the times my creativity comes out in perhaps suggesting alternative sounds that they could use in order to take what they've done and make it sound cooler, or just really small detail stuff, just, effects and maybe using a lower gain guitar amp sound for this one overdub, or using this weird guitar over there, or I don't know, just small little things that help give the sonics a little bit more texture and maybe lift the parts out more than they would if it was just left as it was on the demo. But from time to time I work with clients who want more in-depth work done on their music, and it tends to me, when I do that, I'm not really trying to shape their music in a commercial direction. It's rarely that they're like, I've got these songs, but they need to be hits. It's more just like me having to get onto their level, kind of listening to the music and figure out what it is that they want to hear out of it. And a lot of the times, again, it comes down to small tweaks, which are just smoothing the edges. Something which I definitely think of a lot, and in part, actually, I think is influenced by Forrester, who you just mentioned, is the idea of things not jumping out to the listener. You never want the listener to be listening to a song and notice something that sounds out of place. Just as in a film, you don't want to see the cameraman's foot in the corner of the take, or a really weird chop in the middle of some conversation that just completely ruins the rhythm or the pacing of some scenes. It's the stuff like that. It's just about the fine detail, making sure that sections aren't double the length they should be, which seems to be quite a theme I find with clients that aren't very confident in their songwriting. Is often they'll loop the same thing too many times, or they'll do the opposite. They'll just create riff salads. They'll just write 8 riffs that are kind of linked, and they'll put 2 repeats of each, end on end on end. And by the end, you don't have any idea what the section was trying to say. So a lot of it to do for me is about arrangements, and then just tweaking the songwriting so that there aren't any rough edges, so that the transitions are really smooth, and that the whole thing feels like it just flows from beginning to the end, and you're not checking your watch halfway through the song.
Yeah. I think that's something very important in songwriting, because I've met a lot of people that have very good ideas, and they just record an idea of like 1 minute, which is like 2 riffs together, but then they have no clue how to say something with it, how to develop their ideas, and understand that elements have to start adding and going on top of each other or taking away, and all this arrangement kind of crafting of the flow of the music. Sometimes people don't understand, and they're just stuck there, and they just pile up ideas, and ideas are always songs that are being written, but they never get done because they cannot see the fact that elements start adding to each other every 3 bars. Then there's the feel in the fourth, for example. Just, of course, it's not everything a formula and like very mathematic and strict, but every 4th bar, then you have a small transition. When then at the next 4 bars you have the same thing, but with a new element, and something changes, and then it evolves. It feels that evolves, and it moves forward. And that's something that you have experienced with bands, that you have helped them with that.
Yeah, for sure. And actually more tends to be with solo artists, but yeah, occasionally with bands too. And it's very real, and it's something which I know I fall prey to as well. Without having much time to write music, I'll tend to just write a couple of parts and leave it at that. And when you don't have an overarching song, I often find that I find myself overdeveloping parts and trying to be too clever with those 2 riffs and throw too many layers on top of it, and then it doesn't give you anywhere to go. And you can't link together all of these extremely developed ideas that are very dense, because there's no dynamic, there's no shifting moods between the parts. It all sounds very busy.
Yeah, that's true. And but you prefer more the technical side of things, like when the song gets to the stage of mixing it, for example, or you also love. Do you do anything creative on the editing, or it's just getting things into place?
Yeah, it tends to be more that. I mean, I think editing is quite a refined task, and I think it's quite difficult to do it in a way that sounds human. And I think that's something which I'm fairly good at. And I do think that makes a big difference. And in my productions, I tend not to want things to be absolutely 100% gridded and in tune. Well, actually, no, sorry. In tune, yes. I don't like things being out of tune, but I like when there's an element of humanity in there, if there was something human in a good way in the performances. But I wouldn't say that I do. I'm not the kind of person that does loads of kind of creative chopping and kind of creating new parts out of heavily edited old ones and things like that. So no, for me, it's
So when it gets to the stage of mixing, for example, you were talking about that you are discovering this new way to get more low end on your mixes. How are you achieving that? Like, or have you noticed that in order to get the loudness level, you have figured that nowadays it pleases you more to have more low end than everything so flat and squashed, that you're loving to have more dynamics on the low end, and you feel that it's nicer now? It's more a matter of taste that you have evolved there, or what is it exactly, or a special technique that you're using? Or
I wouldn't say it's a special technique. I think it's interesting, yes, that with loudness being less of a big deal, I don't. It's not something I ever think about, to be honest, until I start getting masters back. And usually, one of the first comments will be like, "Can you make this master a bit quieter?" Yeah, that is a point. I guess a few years ago, bass did have to be sacrificed in order to achieve loudness, and now it doesn't feel like you have to make that sacrifice at all. So that's great. And then I guess a lot of plugins, I'd say a lot of it to me is to do with dynamics. It's about playing with how long the bass frequencies hang around for and how much they interact with the other elements. I mean, if you're mixing on an SSL and you have that bus compressor and you want to use it, you are severely limited as to how much low end you can put onto your kick drum if you don't want the whole mix to be pumping like crazy around it. And I mean, for years now, there's been so many alternatives in the hardware and software world where you can shelve off low end in the sidechain so that the compressor isn't reacting to that. And you can maintain the huge size of your bass drum and bass. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a new technique for me. It's just a preference. And
so it's a matter of taste that you have evolved somewhere there. Okay.
Yeah, it's a matter of, I guess, that animal feeling of low end. You know, that I want to feel the kick drum beating in my chest. And I want to feel like the bass guitar is extending down to rumble underneath everything when it's appropriate. And I think sometimes I just push it a bit further and I go, oh, this sounds awesome. Like I don't have a problem with how this sounds, but I listen to something else. And well, I'd say in general though, when I'm referencing, generally after the end of day one of mixing on something, I reference something that I know sounds good and it sounds weird to me. And I'll be like, wow, my mix is so much smoother. Or, my mix has such an area top end. This is amazing. And then I come back in a couple of days' time and my point of reference has changed. And I'm like, no, my mix wasn't smooth. It just lacked presence. Or my mix didn't have too much air. It just had like a wind blowing on top of it of harmonics and sparkle that was totally not necessary. So, I guess I'm always a bit careful there because I don't 100% trust my judgment in the moment.
No, that's very interesting. Yeah, that you need to go outside and have a break and come with fresh ears.
Yeah, and I also will use spectral analyzers. I'll use tools. I'll use EQs that show you, a graphic of the sound that you're working on, so that I can see really quickly. And I like that. I like that those things can sometimes inform the ear a lot better. Especially with judgments, like for example, what cue to use on an EQ. I find that if I'm just doing it blind, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with, but I tend to stick to fairly kind of comfortable cues on things. And if it's not doing enough, then I'll move the frequency point around. Whereas when I've got a visual of the low end on my kick drum, I might choose to use a really narrow cue cut, or even more rarely, but satisfyingly, a really narrow cue boost on something when I can see there's just a really small area that's lacking. Whereas, if I wasn't seeing it, I might have completely messed up the balance of the low end by using a much wider cue or searching for days to find how the low end should be. I can trust that that's the right judgment to make. And I think there's so many kind of objective decisions that need to be made in mixing that there's no harm at all in doing that. Even though for some people it's like, no, you should never trust your eyes over your ears and that kind of stuff.
No, I think that the tools that exist nowadays to assist your hearing are very important to have them and to understand that it's a complement. Like you cannot watch the instruments without using your ears, and exactly the same other way around. It's of course, like for a pilot, for example, they have instruments to fly at night, but they need to know how to operate them and how to interpret them, and it's a whole communication thing. And I'm going back to your quote of the low end. Now I wanted to mention that nowadays that I've been getting into a little bit more into electronic music, I've noticed that the communication between the kick drum and the bass line, because you talked about the wavelength, so I've noticed that it's very, very important to determine when the low end of your kick drum is ending and when is the note of your bass line is coming up. Because even if you are because some people say, okay, I'll just sidechain it and I'll just take the bass down when the kick goes in. But then, when the kick goes back after the compressor, or the bass goes back after the compressor, then they will collide anyways because your tail is too long. And if you take your tail shorter, then you don't need to do that. Like I've noticed that in electronic music is very dangerous because then all of a sudden you have this 808 kick that is massive tail and it has one tone that it's tuned on a note. And then if you want to put a bass line on top of it, you end up cutting all the subs until even bass until 100 hertz. So you are like, oh, so I should not have bass at all. But then when you start taking the tail away out of your kick drum, things start getting into place. How have you experienced that with real drums, like with real bass drums?
Yeah, I have. I think I tried. It's really interesting, and it's a world I'm really not very aware of. I haven't spent much time in. It sounds like it would be really a great experience actually to work on that kind of stuff. But no, there's definitely something there with real drums for me. I think one of the huge issues for real drums, and I like to use as little sample as possible, is bleed management. Less of an issue on bass drum, but occasionally it is an issue. For example, if you want to boost a ton of high end into your bass drum mic, and there's some snare bleed coming through there, it can make that snare can actually start to become quite audible. And if there's really fast playing where there's kicks with snares landing right afterwards, you have to be really careful about your gating in order that you've got enough length of the bass drum so that it sounds big, and at the same time so that your note's getting gated out. And it's happened to me actually on the mix I'm working on at the moment that I was struggling to get the low end right. And it wasn't related to a gate, it was related to the compressor having too long a release time, which I thought I was getting this really great attack from this particular compressor, and it's one that I haven't been using very much, and certainly not with those settings. And I didn't really think about it. I built that at the beginning of the foundation of my mix. I thought things sounded good. Then later I was like, it feels like it needs more low end, and I was trying to EQ in more low end or excite more low end. And none of it was really working until just kind of on a chance, I revisited the compressor and shortened the release time and actually mixed a bit of dry signal back into it. And suddenly it was like, whoa, now this mix has so much more low end. And I was kicking myself because it's such a rookie error. You see people all day talking about, being careful of compression on bass instruments because of how they can rob the low end. But it's a huge one, and that's one which I've got at the forefront of my mind after that. So it's definitely something I'm going to be really, really careful with moving forwards. And it can be tough, I think, trying to shape the envelope of the sound, especially with bass drums. I like them to sound really wet and kind of thucky sounding when you hear them. And sometimes, that can rob the low end really badly. And in some music you don't notice, but in other music, when there's more space, it can be really inappropriate.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you have to be careful. I was thinking about the double bass drum. Sometimes the low end can get so muddy that you don't even listen to the bass anymore. Like there's low end active all the time. The things don't breathe. So I was wondering that sometimes you have to like maybe shorten it a little bit, or where's the point where the kick drum is like heavy enough and it doesn't interfere with all the rest of the low end instruments happening in the mix.
Yeah, it's really tough to find that point. I think you've got a good point, and I think, in the past, if you listen to really fast records, they tend to have very little low end, where actually I think there's probably more to be extracted there. You probably don't have the ability to use as much low end as you would on a rock mix, but you could probably play with it somewhat and have it so that the low end is better controlled and shorter, but still present.
How do you start like crafting your bass tone, like your bass guitar tone, because as far as I understood, you started recording your own ideas, and like when you started producing music, and then you started crafting your own sounds, like for songwriting, or and then how, when you started getting things to sound decent, or when you started to like your own sound, what's the motive that drove you to find that bass tone? How did you end up there?
Yeah, it's interesting because actually when I used to demo stuff back when I started, I had no idea about bass. I was a guitarist. I still really am a guitarist primarily. It was only once I joined Periphery I started to actually even care about like, what can we do with this instrument to sound cool? And really, I mean, the starting point for me was the Darkglass B7K. That was where it started, because I heard, I think his name is Tor, the bassist in Shining at that time, who was one of the first kind of big endorsers of Darkglass's pedals. I heard him live and I was like, wow, that bass tone's fantastic. How is it so huge and distorted and maintain the low end at the same time? And I think it's really, that is the huge question for me with bass. It's similar to compression. Like, I guess as you distort more and more, the character starts to get flubbier and flubbier. So how do you generate a really distorted bass tone that still has low end without it sounding flubby? And it really just comes down to filtering, like filtering away low end before the distortion, and then which the Darkglass pedals do with the voicing switches, and then replacing it again with an undistorted bass signal, either restricted just to the frequencies that you have left, or a full range DI that sits underneath your distorted tone. So how I go about creating my bass tone could be any number of ways. I can do it entirely in software, using whether it is the Darkglass neural plugins that now exist, or whether it's using, there's a great plugin called Saturn by FabFilter, which is a multi-band distortion. So basically you can just distort your mid-range frequencies if you want. and then at the same time leave clean the outer edges of your tone. And that's something which I've done quite a lot. And that's a fairly standard way for me to go about things when I'm sent something to mix and I've just been sent a DI. Or there's particularly a pedal within the Logic pedal designer, I think it's called, suite. So it's just like their basic pedals if you want to just plug in a guitar and play with a tone. And it's supposed to be a clone of a Proco Rat pedal.
Okay.
And I liked it so much, I went and bought the real thing, which sounds nothing like the model in Logic, unfortunately. But that particular pedal in that Logic suite sounds amazing on bass. It's one of the most kind of gnarly sounding distortions I've ever heard.
That's great.
So yeah, that's been one that I keep coming back to for my tones. And I'll do that, and then I tend not to use any kind of amplifier modeling actually, because any amps, especially like the kind of Ampeg amps, which are based on, I guess, like a fairly typical guitar amp tone stack, have this huge mid scoop built into them, into the tone stack. And if I want that, you can just EQ mids out of the DI. But typically I don't want that. I actually want to retain as much of the mids as I can in my bass most of the time, because for me, that's where you really hear the character of the distortion. And for me, that's where the bass tone can then gel with the guitars. What I really want from my bass tone is for it to sound like, I'm going to steal a term from Architects, a band that I worked with last year. They refer to the bass as the dad guitar. So that's what I think of it as now, the dad guitar. It's got to be like it's got to have like the same character as the guitars for me in the way that it distorts and the way that it carries in the mix. But of course, kind of scaled down to this much deeper tonality. So that's kind of how I go about creating my tones, will be distortion and then into a cabinet model, which is typically there just to smooth the top end, because of the way that speakers would naturally do that.
Yeah.
And then I'm not afraid to EQ and compress the crap out of it to get it to where I want in the mix. But that's the building blocks of my tone. Like I say, I mean, funnily enough, for Architects, we kind of did that, but in the hardware realm. So we had like a Diesel Herbert amplifier actually, which was the main guitar distortion, which sounded amazing, with that going through a 412 at the same time feeding it through an Alpha Omega pedal, at the same time taking a clean DI and also having a clean Ampeg as well. So that's kind of a more hardware way of doing things. And again, the bass tone came out awesome. But for me, it's just about that building blocks of filtering the signal, distorting the mid-range band, and preserving mid-range from that point onwards.
Yeah, it's very interesting what happens with distortions when you start filtering the low end before the distortion and the harmonics that creates, because you're taking those frequencies away so they're not going into the clipper, and then you boost them back. It's very interesting what you can get with those chains. I was wondering, like, when you started building your tone, because like I guess that some people might consider that you have this like signature Nolly sound, and it's like what was the issue that you were trying to solve when you were trying to nail this sound? Because of course you had some other options before, like, or did you start playing bass because of the V7K? I doubt it. So
no, but I started I started playing bass because of Periphery, and then I had to figure out how I was going to work.
So what was the problem? Like, why it didn't work before? What were you trying to solve when you were searching for this sound?
It's about the relationship between bass and guitar for me. Okay. It's about this character that Misha and Periphery and I call binding.
Okay.
Which is where you get this like just completely congruous octave between the guitars and the bass, and you can hear the kind of grind and rattle of the bass in the mid-range, and because of that it sounds like the guitars have an octaver on it, yet at the same time the bass is really clear and present in the mix. And you take away the distortion and that doesn't happen for me most of the time, unless you compress it hugely, but it tends to be too round sounding. It doesn't have the nastiness. So it was really about pushing how much you could distort the bass, which came down to how much you could filter it. And that was very much the thing. And it definitely wasn't trying to have a different sound. And in fact, I think this sound has existed, or this way of achieving bass tones has existed for a long time on records. I think like metal and rock producers have been doing this kind of thing for ages. It's just, it hasn't really been the way that bassists have done it themselves. I mean, some bassists, like John Myung from Dream Theater has his gigantic fridges full of every known rack system and splitting the signal into 4 different amps and all that kind of thing. But I guess it was just a refinement of that and making that my tone all the time rather than just having a Sans amp that I use live like most metal bassists do. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
So what do you think that how's the future coming? Are you excited about the whole digital era taking on top of the analog world, or how does the future look for you? Are you going to continue working in music, and what excites you from the future?
Yeah, I think what's really exciting now is we're getting closer and closer to really being able to recreate amazing sounding analog devices in the box. And I think that for me, just from an engineering perspective, is super exciting. There's amazing products out there already, but especially with things like guitar amp modeling, there's still certain things that I want to hear, and I'm really looking forward to those being solved, because I think it generates like a deeper understanding even of the analog beasts that we have around us. And for me, I really enjoy kind of understanding how they work. I think for me personally, what I'm really looking forward to, within what I do is just getting more and more knowledge about the tools that I use, and therefore knowing how to use them better and more appropriately. For sure I'm going to keep working in music, and especially in mixing. I can see myself actually moving away from working in the studio a little bit, and I'm kind of already starting to move away from doing that, apart from projects that are really close to my heart. Just because I enjoy, again, the kind of more engineering aspects of mixing and the less social aspects, which sometimes suits me. I like to be able to kind of work at my own pace, which sometimes is really fast and sometimes really slow, and just kind of do that without somebody breathing down my neck. So much as I enjoy kind of working collaboratively with people, I think for me, mixing is just something that suits my lifestyle and who I am a bit better. But yeah, I think moving forwards, I'd like to work a lot on products as well, product development. We have a lot of interesting things happening with GGD, whether it's more sample libraries or perhaps even branching into other products in general. And I think it's really cool to go through the kind of processes we were talking about at the beginning of this interview about, making things intuitive for people, showing people or giving people tools that, as you described, allow them to get on with the fun, creative side of things, but that perhaps aren't patronizing. They're not so kind of beginner focused, but they just kind of take out some of the frustrations and give people tones that are just going to deliver exactly what they need for their purposes without being something that's just super basic or stripped down. I think I really enjoy that process because it kind of ties in with getting to understand how things work, the nuts and bolts of making things work and the research of how to generate the sounds that I hear in my head. And I think that for me is kind of the thing that keeps me coming back to audio in general.
That's awesome. Well, you're welcome to the family of Neural DSP and start collaborating with us. We are really excited about the future.
Thank
too.
you, man.
And I'm also interested on the moment when the technology, because the technology is growing all the time and the processors are developing all the time and they're faster and more powerful and there's more memory available at cheaper costs. So it's the spike of this transition is so exponential that at some point we will be able to, hopefully, to be able to get rid of this stigma of the digital versus the analog, and then it's gonna be the same, and then it's from there, from when that base, if it's ever reached, it would be really interesting to see a creative circle again, like of new tools for musicians that are thought outside of the box and designed based on the digital realm. How to approach the sound design, how to approach the building an amplifier, for example. How do you build your guitar tone from scratch? If you can design your amplifier from scratch from the digital perspective, sure. Because you don't need to know circuits anymore. You're just using your ears, for example. Sure. When I'm very excited to reach that point, if ever reached.
For sure, yeah. I mean, that stuff is just super exciting. I think for me, my mind boggles a little bit because I think I do always, even with the digital side of things, like to have a foot in the analog realm to kind of be replicating something which is already something I know. So it's a bit scary moving beyond that into just kind of pure creative tools. But I think it's really exciting, and I think it's going to be super cool to see what people growing up with that technology as a given will do with it. I think that's going to be super exciting too. When we're old farts that can still remember what a guitar amp even looks like, what are the young ones going to be doing? I think it's super cool.
That would be really interesting to see at some point. Let's see how the future leads us.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks for being with us, Nolly, and have a great time, and welcome to collaborate with us in Neural DSP. And I hope that you are happy that now you don't have to plug your pedals all the time, dude. That you have it in the digital realm. And how are you happy with the performance of it?
Amazing, yeah.
Has it satisfied you?
Totally, yeah. I literally haven't used the pedals for any mixing stuff since having the plugins. They sound exactly the same to my ear.
That's really good to hear. We're at least when we're trying to emulate analog stuff, we want to do it right, and it's kind of hard, but I think that we're getting there. And as I told you, we're trying to look forward to do something more interesting for the future than just replicating things that already exist.
Sure.
Let's try to focus to create something new.
For sure, man.
But thanks for being with us, and catch you up next time.
Wicked.
This was Inside the Machine with Adam, Nolly, GetGood of Neural DSP podcast. Thank you, man.
Thank you very much, guys.
Take care. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.